It was a quiet spring evening in the small town of Everly, where the streets were lined with blooming cherry blossoms and the faint scent of honeysuckle wafted through the air. Life here moved at a tranquil pace, with its residents tucked into routines that rarely diverged. But what happened to 16-year-old Eleanor Hayes, a reserved girl with a penchant for sketching birds in her notebook, would shatter the stillness of the town and shake its faith to its core? Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. Eleanor was the kind of girl who blended into the background of her high school. Her wavy auburn hair framed a delicate face often hidden behind large, round glasses. Her soft demeanor meant few truly got to know her, but those who did saw a kindness and creativity that could illuminate even the darkest corners of a room. One evening, while walking home from her friend Claire's house, Eleanor's world turned upside down. A distracted driver barreling down Oak Ridge Avenue struck her as she crossed the road. The impact threw her body into the air, and she landed lifelessly in the gutter. Paramedics arrived minutes later, but they could do little. By the time they reached the hospital, Eleanor had no pulse, no signs of life. The doctors worked tirelessly, shocking her heart, administering adrenaline and shouting commands, but after 45 agonizing minutes, they pronounced her dead at 9:13 p.m. The medical team stood solemnly, defeated, as her body lay cold and still. What happened next defied explanation. At 9:34 p.m., just as a nurse was about to prepare Eleanor's body for the morgue, her heart monitor suddenly beeped. The sound startled the nurse, who turned to see Eleanor's fingers twitch. The room filled with gasps as her eyes fluttered open. Eleanor Hayes had returned. Her recovery was miraculous. Within days, she was sitting up in her hospital bed, physically fragile but coherent. However, there was something different about her. Her once quiet gaze now bore an intensity that unnerved those around her. Friends, family, and even the medical staff noticed how her voice had changed, measured and calm, yet carrying an unsettling weight. When her parents, Mary and Greg, asked her about what happened, Eleanor hesitated before answering. She spoke of a bright light, a sensation of weightlessness, and a field of golden wheat that stretched infinitely. She described an overwhelming sense of peace until a towering figure emerged from the light, a man with radiant eyes and flowing robes, who she claimed was Jesus Christ. But it wasn't the serene vision of Jesus that haunted her, it was his words. "Go back," he told her, his voice resonating like a symphony of thunder and whispers. "Tell them the truth they have ignored. Tell them to prepare, for the time is near." When Eleanor first recounted this to her parents, they exchanged uneasy glances. Her mother, a devout Catholic, clutched her rosary, while her father, an agnostic, dismissed it as a hallucination born from trauma. Yet Eleanor insisted, her voice unwavering. "He told me that people think they have time, but they don't. He said most are blind to what's coming." Word of Eleanor's experience spread through the town like wildfire. What began as hushed whispers soon became fervent speculation. Curious neighbors, skeptical journalists, and members of local churches began visiting the Hayes' modest home, seeking to hear Eleanor's account firsthand. Each time she told the story, she spoke with a conviction that left even skeptics unsettled. "He showed me what's waiting for us," Eleanor told a group of visitors one afternoon. Her eyes, which had once been soft and inviting, now carried a glint of sorrow and urgency. "I saw a chasm filled with fire and shadow, where souls screamed for mercy but found none. He said many are heading there because they've forgotten him, because they've traded truth for comfort." Her descriptions were vivid and chilling. She spoke of people engulfed in flames, reaching out for help, their faces twisted in eternal regret. She described another place, a city of light and joy, where laughter echoed like music, but it was the former vision that terrified her. "He said we've been warned for centuries, but the warnings have been ignored. He told me to speak, to be his voice." As more people heard Eleanor's message, the reactions were polarized. Some were moved to tears, believing she had been chosen as a modern-day prophet. Church attendance in Everly surged, with pastors urging their congregations to repent and prepare their souls. Others dismissed her as a troubled teenager seeking attention, attributing her visions to the brain's reaction to death. Eleanor herself became a reluctant figurehead. She didn't want fame or attention. She wanted people to understand the gravity of what she had seen. "I'm not special," she told a local news station during a rare interview. "I'm just a messenger. What you do with the message is up to you." Despite her humility, Eleanor's life changed drastically. Strangers stopped her on the street to ask for prayers or guidance. Others accused her of fabricating the story for notoriety. The scrutiny weighed heavily on her, and she began withdrawing from the public eye. But the more she tried to retreat, the more persistent the message became. "He speaks to me in dreams," she confided to her mother late one night. "He shows me what's coming. Storms, famine, war. It's like the earth is crying out." One particularly harrowing vision left Eleanor inconsolable for days. She described seeing the world consumed by darkness, where cities crumbled and oceans rose to swallow the land. "He told me the earth will be purified, and only those who have turned to him will endure," she whispered to her mother, tears streaming down her face. "It's not about punishment, it's about restoration, but it will be terrifying." As weeks turned into months, the impact of Eleanor's message rippled far beyond Everly. Online forums and social media lit up with debates about her experience. Some heralded her as a prophet, comparing her story to biblical accounts of Lazarus and Jonah. Others sought to debunk her claims, arguing that near-death experiences were common and scientifically explainable. Eleanor's former friends struggled to reconcile the girl they once knew with the somber messenger she had become. Claire, who had been with Eleanor hours before the accident, described her as like a completely different person. Older almost. It's like she's seen things no one should ever see. The Hayes family, once a picture of suburban normalcy, became fractured under the strain. Greg, Eleanor's father, remained a skeptic, often retreating to his garage to escape the mounting tension. Mary, on the other hand, grew increasingly devout, spending hours in prayer and urging Greg to take their daughter's visions seriously. "If she was sent back, there's a reason," Mary insisted during one of their arguments. "We can't just ignore this." Eleanor, torn between her mission and her desire for a normal life, began to struggle with the weight of her message. "Why me?" she cried one night, alone in her room. "I'm just a kid. I don't know how to fix the world." But the visions persisted, and so did her resolve. She began keeping a journal, meticulously recording everything she saw and heard, hoping that someday, someone would understand. The turning point came during a town hall meeting organized by the local church. Hundreds gathered to hear Eleanor speak, filling the pews and spilling out into the aisles. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation, a mix of reverence and skepticism. Eleanor stepped up to the pulpit, her small frame dwarfed by the towering wooden cross behind her. She took a deep breath, clutching the edges of the podium. "What I'm about to say isn't easy," she began, her voice steady. "But it's the truth. We've all been given a choice. We can continue living as if nothing matters, as if the way we treat others, the way we treat this world has no consequences. Or we can change, not for fear of punishment, but because we were made for something greater." Her words struck a chord with many, and for the first time Eleanor felt a glimmer of hope. But not everyone was moved. As she left the church that evening, a group of protesters confronted her, accusing her of spreading fear and lies. One man shouted, "You're just a kid with a vivid imagination! Stop pretending to be some kind of savior!" The incident left Eleanor shaken, but it also solidified her resolve. "I'm not the savior," she told her mother later that night. "He is. I'm just trying to make people listen." As the years passed, Eleanor's story continued to inspire, challenge, and divide. Some claimed her message had saved their lives, prompting them to reconnect with their faith or mend broken relationships. Others dismissed her as a footnote in the town's history, a curious tale of a girl who cheated death. For Eleanor, the journey was never about recognition or validation. She carried the weight of her visions quietly, often retreating to the golden fields in her dreams, where she could once again feel the presence of the man who had sent her back. His final words to her echoed endlessly in her heart, "Tell them I am coming." Eleanor lived the rest of her life with a quiet sense of purpose, her eyes always scanning the horizon as if waiting for something, or someone. And though she never claimed to understand the full scope of what she had seen, she remained steadfast in her mission, to remind the world that time is a gift, and that the choices we make today echo into eternity. Eleanor Hayes' life after her resurrection became a whirlwind of faith, skepticism, and an unrelenting pressure to understand her purpose. But as time went on, her journey deepened in complexity, taking her to places and experiences that few could fathom. Shortly after the church meeting, Eleanor began experiencing physical changes that mystified doctors and her family alike. Her energy fluctuated wildly. One day she could barely lift her head from the pillow, her body heavy and aching. The next, she would rise with a vigor that seemed almost supernatural, her movements precise and filled with purpose. More disturbingly, small, faint burns began to appear on her arms and hands. At first, they resembled the marks of an accident, but they always vanished within hours, leaving her skin unblemished. Her mother, Mary, was the first to connect the dots. "They're signs," she whispered to Eleanor one morning, tracing a finger over a faint scorch mark on her daughter's wrist. "The burns. They're like the fire you saw. They're reminders." Eleanor wasn't so sure. To her, the marks felt like a warning rather than a sign of divine approval. She couldn't help but notice that the burns appeared most frequently after moments of doubt or hesitation about her mission. When she questioned whether she had misunderstood the message, the marks would flare up, as though something or someone was prodding her forward. Driven to uncover the meaning behind these occurrences, Eleanor began keeping detailed notes about her body, her dreams, and her feelings. But it wasn't enough to quiet the growing storm within her. She felt torn between her desire to live a normal life and the pull of something far greater. The weight of being a messenger for something so vast and unknowable began to feel unbearable. Eleanor's dreams, which had once been sporadic, grew more frequent and vivid. She found herself standing on desolate plains where the ground cracked beneath her feet, releasing plumes of sulfuric steam. Towering figures with hollow eyes watched her silently from the shadows. Sometimes she heard Jesus' voice, calm, yet filled with sorrow. He reminded her of humanity's waywardness, of the choices being made that drove the world closer to ruin. One night, she dreamed of a colossal storm forming over the earth. She watched as winds tore through cities, oceans surged onto land, and fire rained from the sky. At the storm's center stood Jesus, his eyes blazing with both fury and heartbreak. He turned to her and said, "It doesn't have to end like this. Tell them." Eleanor awoke in a cold sweat, her heart pounding. She wrote down every detail, her pen shaking in her hand. But as the dream lingered, she began to notice its peculiar clarity. This wasn't just a vision. It felt like a glimpse of what could be, of a future that was neither set in stone nor entirely avoidable. Eleanor's interactions with others became increasingly fraught. The more she tried to explain her experiences, the more resistance she encountered. Some dismissed her outright, labeling her as delusional or attention-seeking. Others listened, but their expressions betrayed a mix of fear and skepticism. Only a handful truly believed her, and even they struggled to grasp the enormity of what she described. She began to feel isolated, even in her own home. Her father, Greg, grew more distant, retreating into his work and refusing to discuss anything related to her visions. Her mother remained supportive but often overwhelmed, torn between wanting to protect her daughter and encouraging her to fulfill what seemed to be a divine mandate. Seeking solace, Eleanor turned to nature. She often wandered into the woods behind her house, finding comfort in the rustling leaves and the dappled sunlight. One afternoon, as she sat by a stream, she felt an inexplicable presence. The air grew still, and a warm golden light enveloped her. She heard a voice, not loud but clear. "Do not fear their disbelief. Your task is to plant the seeds, not to see them grow." The words filled her with a quiet resolve. For the first time in weeks, she felt at peace. She realized that her role wasn't to convince or convert, but to simply share the message she had been given. What people chose to do with it was beyond her control. As Eleanor embraced this perspective, her journey took an unexpected turn. She began receiving letters from people who had heard her story. Some came from nearby towns, others from places she had never heard of. The letters ranged from heartfelt confessions to desperate pleas for guidance. One, written by a woman named Rebecca, stood out. Rebecca described a similar near-death experience she had years ago. Like Eleanor, she had seen a radiant figure and heard a warning about humanity's path. But unlike Eleanor, Rebecca had kept her experience a secret, too afraid of ridicule to share it. "Your courage gives me hope," Rebecca wrote. "Perhaps together, we can help others see what we've seen." Eleanor reached out to Rebecca, and the two began exchanging letters regularly. Rebecca, who lived in a distant city, encouraged Eleanor to visit. Though hesitant at first, Eleanor felt a pull she couldn't ignore. With her mother's reluctant blessing, she made the journey. Meeting Rebecca was like looking into a mirror. Though older by nearly 2 decades, Rebecca shared Eleanor's somber intensity and the sense of carrying a burden too heavy for one person. The two spent hours talking, their conversations weaving between their experiences and the challenges of sharing their truths. Rebecca introduced Eleanor to a small group of people who had also claimed to have near-death experiences with similar messages. They called themselves the Witnesses, not in the sense of forming a religious sect, but as individuals bound by a shared responsibility. Each member had their own unique story, but all spoke of a divine figure urging humanity to change its ways. The Witnesses encouraged Eleanor to share her story on a larger scale. Though she resisted at first, fearing the attention it might bring, she eventually agreed. With their help, she began recording her experiences, creating videos and written accounts that were shared online. The response was overwhelming. Messages flooded in from around the world. Some praised her courage, while others mocked her relentlessly. But amidst the noise, there were those who expressed gratitude, saying her words had inspired them to reevaluate their lives. Eleanor clung to these messages, using them as fuel to continue her work. As Eleanor's influence grew, so did the challenges. She found herself at the center of heated debates, with some labeling her a prophet and others accusing her of being a fraud. Religious leaders weighed in, some embracing her as a modern-day messenger, while others denounced her as a false prophet. One particularly vocal critic was Pastor Jeremiah Cole, a firebrand preacher from a neighboring town. He accused Eleanor of spreading fear and undermining traditional Christian teachings. "God's message is one of love and salvation, not doom and gloom," he declared during a televised sermon. "This girl's visions are not from the Lord, but from her own imagination, or worse, from darker forces." Eleanor was deeply hurt by his words, but she refused to engage in a public feud. Instead, she prayed for guidance, asking for the strength to stay true to her mission. Her resolve was tested further when she began receiving threats from individuals who saw her as a danger to their beliefs or way of life. Through it all, Eleanor remained steadfast. She continued to share her message, drawing strength from the growing community of people who supported her. The Witnesses became her second family, offering counsel and companionship as she navigated the storm her story had created. As the years passed, Eleanor's message began to take root in unexpected ways. Communities inspired by her story started organizing acts of service and environmental restoration. People from different faiths and backgrounds came together, united by a shared desire to create a better world. Eleanor herself continued to experience visions, though they became less frequent. When they did occur, they often carried a sense of urgency. In one dream, she saw a great tree with roots that stretched deep into the earth. The tree was alive but struggling, its branches weighed down by chains. Jesus stood beside it, his hand resting on the trunk. "This is humanity," he told her, "bound yet capable of growth. Free it." Eleanor woke with tears in her eyes. The vision reinforced her belief that change was possible, but it also reminded her of the immense effort required. She couldn't do it alone, nor was she meant to. As she grew older, Eleanor's focus shifted from delivering warnings to fostering hope. She began working with organizations dedicated to addressing the issues she had seen in her visions, from environmental degradation to social inequality. Her story became less about the divine encounter and more about the tangible steps humanity could take to course correct. Though the memory of her experience with Jesus never faded, Eleanor learned to live with the mystery of it. She accepted that some questions would remain unanswered, and that her role was not to solve every problem, but to inspire others to act. By the time Eleanor reached her 20s, she had become a quiet force for change. She avoided the spotlight whenever possible, choosing instead to work behind the scenes. Yet her influence was undeniable. People continued to share her story, and its ripple effects were felt far and wide. As she walked through the golden fields of her dreams one final time, Eleanor heard his voice once more, soft but steady. "Well done." The world beyond Everly became Eleanor Hayes' mission field, though she had never sought the spotlight that now surrounded her. As her story reached far corners of the globe, Eleanor found herself pulled into situations she could never have imagined. Encounters with world leaders, desperate individuals seeking answers, and even scientists hoping to understand the phenomenon she represented. Each step in her journey carried the same unshakable truth she had been tasked to deliver. But the ways it manifested continued to challenge her, stretching the boundaries of her faith and resilience. Eleanor's growing prominence brought her to the attention of the global media, which dissected her life and experiences with relentless scrutiny. While her story had always been deeply personal, it became a public narrative, reshaped and repackaged by others for their agendas. Documentaries aired questioning the authenticity of her resurrection, complete with interviews from skeptics and theologians. Some accused her of fabrication, claiming she sought fame or financial gain. Others labeled her an apocalyptic fanatic, stoking unnecessary fear in a fragile world. Despite the mounting criticism, Eleanor remained composed in public. "I didn't choose this path," she said during a rare interview with a major news network. "I don't ask anyone to believe me. I only ask that you listen. What you do with the message is your choice." Her calm demeanor, paired with her refusal to engage in vitriolic debates, only fueled curiosity and respect among those who sought her out. It became increasingly clear to her supporters that she wasn't building a movement around herself. Her only goal was to amplify the message she had been given. Her detractors, however, were not easily silenced. Organized groups sprang up online and in person, dedicated to debunking her claims. Some went so far as to follow her to public appearances, holding signs declaring her a false prophet. Others engaged in more sinister behavior, sending threatening letters and attempting to intimidate her family. Greg, her father, who had been skeptical of her experiences from the start, grew increasingly protective and resentful of the disruption to their lives. "I never wanted this for her," Greg told a journalist who had come to Everly to document Eleanor's rise. "She's just a kid, or she was. Now it's like she belongs to the world, and I don't know if she'll ever be my daughter again." His words struck a chord with Eleanor when she read the article. For all the global impact her message had made, it was becoming clear that her own family was fracturing under the pressure. Eleanor tried to repair the rift with her father, but their conversations often turned tense. Greg's doubts weren't just about her experience, they were rooted in his fear of losing her entirely to something he couldn't understand. "I just want you to be safe," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch, "and I don't think the world you're stepping into can give you that." Eleanor reached for his hand, her voice soft. "I don't feel safe, Dad, but I don't think I was sent back to feel safe. I think I was sent back to stand in the storm." Her words hung in the air between them, uniting them briefly in their shared worry, even if they couldn't fully reconcile their beliefs. As Eleanor's journey continued, she began receiving invitations to speak at conferences, universities, and interfaith gatherings. Some were in grand halls filled with hundreds of people, while others were intimate settings where a dozen individuals shared their struggles and stories. She approached each event with the same humility, often beginning with, "I don't have answers. I only have what I was shown." One such gathering took place in Geneva, where a coalition of spiritual leaders had invited her to share her experience with representatives from multiple faiths. The room buzzed with anticipation as Eleanor stepped to the podium, her slight frame dwarfed by the imposing space. Yet, as she began to speak, the room fell silent, her words weaving a tapestry of hope and warning. "I was shown a world not so different from ours," she said, her voice steady. "A world teetering on the edge of something irreversible. But I was also shown that we hold the power to change its course, not through miracles, but through the choices we make every day." Her speech resonated deeply with many in attendance, sparking discussions about the intersection of faith, morality, and environmental responsibility. Religious leaders who had never shared a stage before found themselves in deep conversation, inspired by Eleanor's ability to transcend doctrinal divides. For a brief moment, it seemed as if her message had the power to bridge gaps that had existed for centuries. However, Eleanor's journey wasn't without personal cost. The demands of her mission left little room for a traditional life. Friendships from her youth faded as her focus shifted to the larger calling before her. Even mundane joys, like sketching birds in her notebook, became rare as her days filled with travel, speaking engagements, and writing. Loneliness became a constant companion, though she rarely admitted it aloud. The people she encountered often looked to her as a symbol of hope or an object of curiosity, but few saw her as just Eleanor, a young woman carrying an extraordinary burden. She longed for moments of normalcy, for relationships untainted by the weight of her story. One such connection came unexpectedly during a quiet retreat in the Appalachian Mountains, where she had been invited by a small community to speak about her visions. The retreat center was modest, Nestled among towering trees and winding trails, there she met Daniel, a soft-spoken forestry student who had come to the event out of curiosity rather than faith. Daniel was unlike anyone Eleanor had met before. He listened to her story without judgment or expectation, treating her with a kindness that felt refreshingly unremarkable. Over the course of the retreat, the two spent hours walking through the forest, discussing everything from philosophy to their favorite books. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt a sense of ease. "You don't see me as a messenger," she said one afternoon as they sat by a bubbling creek. Daniel shrugged, his gaze steady. "I see you as someone who's been through something incredible, but that doesn't mean you're not still human." His words stayed with her long after the retreat ended. Though their paths diverged, the connection reminded Eleanor of the importance of grounding herself in the simple human moments that had become so rare in her life. As time went on, Eleanor began collaborating with scientists and researchers interested in the phenomenon of near-death experiences. While she remained wary of attempts to dissect or explain her visions, she recognized the value of engaging with these communities. By participating in studies and discussions, she hoped to bridge the gap between science and spirituality, offering a perspective that valued both faith and inquiry. One project, led by a team of neuroscientists, sought to explore the brain activity of individuals who had experienced similar events. Eleanor agreed to participate, undergoing a series of scans and tests designed to measure her responses to various stimuli. The results were inconclusive, though the researchers noted unusual patterns in her brain activity when she described her visions. For Eleanor, the experience reaffirmed her belief that the divine couldn't be fully understood through science alone. "I don't think the answers are meant to be easy," she told one of the researchers, "but I do think we're meant to keep asking questions." Eleanor's story also began to inspire artistic interpretations, with musicians, writers, and filmmakers drawing from her experiences to create works that resonated with audiences worldwide. While she appreciated the creativity her story had sparked, she remained cautious about how her message was portrayed. One filmmaker approached her with a proposal for a feature-length documentary, promising to honor her vision while exploring its broader implications. Eleanor hesitated, but ultimately agreed, hoping it could reach those who might otherwise never encounter her story. The resulting film, Light Between Worlds, became a global sensation. It depicted Eleanor's journey with a balance of reverence and skepticism, allowing viewers to draw their own conclusions. The film's success brought her message to an even wider audience, but also intensified the scrutiny she faced. For every person inspired by the film, there were others who used it as ammunition to dismiss her as a fabricated phenomenon. Eleanor braced herself for the backlash, relying on her growing community of supporters for strength. Among them were the witnesses, who remained steadfast in their belief that her story was part of something much larger than any one person. In her later years, Eleanor turned her focus to mentoring others who had experienced similar revelations. She saw it as her responsibility to guide them, helping them navigate the challenges she had faced and avoid the pitfalls of fame and doubt. Through these efforts, she cultivated a network of individuals united by a shared sense of purpose. Eleanor's influence continued to ripple across the world, touching lives in ways she couldn't always see. While she had never sought recognition or accolades, she became a symbol of resilience and faith in the face of the unknown. Her message, simple yet profound, endured as a reminder of humanity's capacity for change. And as the years passed, Eleanor's visions grew less frequent, replaced by a quiet certainty that she had fulfilled the task she had been given. When she finally passed away in her sleep at the age of 78, the world mourned not just the loss of a messenger, but the passing of someone who had dedicated her life to reminding humanity of its potential. Her story, however, lived on, etched into the hearts of those who had heard her words, seen her deeds, and felt the quiet, unshakable truth she had carried all her life. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on a girl returning from death with a message from Jesus? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.